This is an inspiring story of one man's transformation, a journey that unveils the strength of the human spirit and the hidden potential within us all. At 29, Daniel Cole had nothing. No money. No friends. No home. He slept behind a crumbling bakery wrapped in a blanket that smelled of rain and regret. His life had once looked different, not luxurious, but hopeful. Now, hope felt like a memory too painful to recall. But then came the dream. It wasn't vivid in a cinematic way. There were no angels or visions. Just a presence. A quiet, undeniable knowing. He was walking through a dark tunnel, cold and lost, when a light, dim, but steady, appeared in the distance. A voice, or perhaps a thought, reached him: "The tunnel isn't your home. Keep moving." He awoke with tears on his cheeks and a strange sense of stillness in his chest. It was 4:13 a.m. Daniel sat up on the damp concrete, his bones aching from the cold. He hadn't felt something stir inside him in years. He whispered into the silence, "What if it's real?" He didn't even know what it was. Only that something had changed. He found a torn notebook near the dumpster. It had only 3 pages. On the first, he wrote, "You are more than what you've survived." Then he stared at the words for a long time, as if waiting for them to become true. Daniel wasn't always broken. He once owned a small graphic design business. He had clients, a small apartment with plants, a partner he loved. But bad timing, one failed contract, mounting debt, and a slow crumble of mental health had undone him. No single disaster, just the quiet erosion of self. And then he disappeared from the world, and no one came looking. For a long time, he stopped trying. Not in an obvious way, no dramatic gestures. He just stopped showing up, for others and for himself. He became invisible, and in time, convinced himself he was meant to be. But the dream wouldn't let go. That morning, as the city slowly yawned awake, Daniel did something unusual. He looked up. At the sky. At the buildings. At the world that had once seemed closed to him. It was still there. Indifferent. Unwelcoming. But also, open. He stood up, brushed off his clothes, and walked toward the public library. Not to read. Just to be somewhere with walls. Just to start. The library didn't welcome him. It tolerated him. Daniel stepped inside with the cautious steps of someone unused to belonging. The warmth hit his skin like a confession. Quiet air, the smell of pages and old wood, this was sanctuary, even if temporary. He found an empty chair near a window and sat down slowly, like someone afraid of being seen. No one looked at him. That was good. He didn't want pity. He just needed silence, and space. He pulled out the notebook with the torn cover and stared at the sentence he'd written earlier that morning. "You are more than what you've survived." It felt like someone else had written it, someone stronger. But the fact that it existed, in his handwriting, made it real. Daniel hadn't held a pen in months. But now his hand moved almost without asking. Words flowed. Not poetry. Not brilliance. Just truth. Raw, messy truth. Memories came first, the day he lost his biggest client, the look in his partner's eyes the night she left, the moment he realized the electricity wouldn't come back on. He didn't write to fix anything. He wrote because he didn't want to drown in silence anymore. Around him, students typed. Elderly readers dozed. A boy asked his mother about dinosaurs. Life moved, unaware of him, and yet he was part of it now. A small part, but not nothing. For 3 hours, Daniel wrote. Then he stopped. His hand ached, but his heart felt different. Not healed, just awake. He stood up, placed the notebook gently into his jacket, and walked to the desk. "Do you have computers I can use?" He asked the librarian, surprised at how weak his voice sounded. She looked up, blinking. Yes. Do you have a library card? He hesitated. No. But, can I get one? You'll need an address. A pause. His heart sank. But, she added, after a glance at his coat, you can use a guest login. For today. That word. Today. Daniel sat at the nearest computer. The login screen blinked at him, waiting. He typed slowly. Not a job search. Not social media. He searched for one word, purpose. The results were overwhelming. Articles. Quotes. Videos. But one headline caught his eye, Your calling is found where pain meets passion. He clicked. And read. And something in him shifted again. He whispered, barely audible, I still have something to give. He didn't know what. He didn't know how. But for the first time in years, he believed that maybe his life wasn't over. It was just changing shape. That evening, Daniel left the library with nothing but his notebook, the words he'd written, and a fire just strong enough to push against the cold. He still had no job, no home, no answers, but now he had momentum. And that, he realized, was more precious than certainty. He walked for hours, uncertain of where to go. The streets were loud again. People rushed by with bags, phones, destinations. Daniel wasn't part of that world yet, but he no longer felt like a ghost in it. He was a shadow growing legs. Near midnight, with nowhere else to be, he sat outside a diner. He didn't beg. He hated the idea of holding out his hand. But hunger overruled pride. He searched his coat pocket, hoping for forgotten coins, and found one wrinkled dollar bill. Just one. Inside, the diner glowed with yellow light. He pushed the door open. A bell rang above him, too loud. A waitress glanced at him, then at the dollar in his hand. She didn't speak, just nodded toward a stool at the counter. He sat, placed the dollar gently on the counter, and whispered, just a coffee. If that's okay. She returned with a steaming cup and a half smile. No questions. No judgment. Just warmth. And for a few minutes, Daniel was a man in a diner drinking coffee, not a man surviving life. 2 stools down sat an older man with paint-stained hands and a wrinkled notebook. The man looked over, nodded once. Long day? Daniel hesitated. Long year. The man chuckled. Same. There was a silence, then, you right? Daniel blinked. A little. Just started again. The man tapped his own notebook. Writing saved me. Kept me sane when the world forgot my name. Daniel looked at him. I think I'm trying to remember mine. They talked for an hour. About nothing. About everything. The man's name was Victor, a retired sign painter. Used to own a shop. Lost it. Rebuilt. Lost again. Now I paint on trash, Victor said, smiling. Sometimes beauty comes from the things we throw away. Before leaving, Victor tore a page from his notebook and slid it over. Take this. It was a sketch. A tree with roots tangled into words, you're not lost. You're growing underground. Daniel stared at it. Then folded it carefully into his pocket. The next morning, he returned to the library. Same chair. Same notebook. But this time, he didn't write pain. He wrote an idea. He titled the page, From Nothing to Enough. And began sketching, not a story, but a vision. What if there was a space where people like him could breathe? What if rock bottom could be a beginning, not an end? He didn't know what it would be. A cafe. A blog. A bench in a park. But something. Something that gave warmth, like the coffee, like Victor's words, like the librarian's silent mercy. Daniel kept writing. Because now, he had a mission. Daniel returned to the library every day for the next week. He came early, stayed late. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to. He had a purpose now, blurry, undefined, but strong enough to keep his feet moving and his mind awake. Each morning began the same: notebook, coffee if he could afford it, then the library. The same chair, the same window, the same worn-out keyboard. He wrote. He sketched. He planned. He had no business degree. No connections. But he had lived what most people only read about in headlines: loss, failure, survival, isolation. And from that depth, he began building something not for profit, but for meaning. The concept was simple: create a platform where people at rock bottom could connect. No preaching, no fixing, just presence. Stories, drawings, anonymous confessions. A digital campfire for the soul. He called it Ground Zero. But ideas don't feed you. They don't pay for socks or soap or shelter. And the fire inside him couldn't heat his bones when the night fell. By Friday, he hadn't eaten in over 30 hours. His body shook as he typed. Hunger blurred his vision, but he kept writing, afraid to stop. Afraid he'd fall back into that hole where days pass without memory or meaning. That night, as he left the library, the cold felt sharper. He wrapped his arms around himself and walked toward the park, the only place he knew he could lie down without being chased away. As he passed a row of dumpsters, he saw a wall with graffiti he hadn't noticed before. It read, "Some people sleep in palaces. Others sleep beneath stars. Both dream." He sat beneath it. Pulled out his notebook. Wrote the quote down. Then closed his eyes and leaned against the brick. He didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted. Around 3 a.m., footsteps woke him. A man in a dark coat, carrying a trash bag, paused nearby. "Cold night," he muttered. Daniel didn't respond. The man looked at him. "You homeless?" A beat. Then, "Yeah." The man nodded. "Used to be, too. You applying anywhere?" Daniel shook his head. "Nowhere will take me. No address. No ID." The man stepped closer, handed him a crumpled card. "They took me. Small print shop. Nothing big, but they don't care where you've been, just where you show up." Daniel took the card. "Tell them Marcus sent you." The man disappeared into the dark. Daniel stared at the card for a long time. Tomorrow had just changed. The print shop sat on the edge of the industrial district, wedged between a laundromat and a tire warehouse. No sign. Just peeling red paint on the door and the sound of machines rumbling behind cracked windows. Daniel stood outside for 10 minutes before he worked up the nerve to enter. A bell rang as he pushed open the door. Inside smelled of ink, oil, and something faintly burnt. An older woman behind the counter looked up from a pile of flyers. Her eyes narrowed, not unkindly. "Help you?" He cleared his throat. Marcus sent me." Her eyes shifted slightly. "Marcus, huh?" She didn't smile. "You ever work a press?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but I learn fast. I'm good with computers. Used to design logos." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded toward the back. "Go see Joe. Tall guy. Covered in ink. Tell him I said to give you a shot." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he walked through the door. Joe didn't ask questions. Just pointed at a stack of posters and said, "Fold. Even. No creases." For 3 hours, Daniel folded until his back hurt and his fingers went numb. He didn't complain. At noon, Joe brought him a sandwich. No words. Just placed it beside him and walked off. That was the moment Daniel knew he wasn't invisible anymore. By the end of the day, he'd folded 500 posters and swept the floor twice. Joe grunted something that sounded like, "See you tomorrow," and Daniel left with tired arms, sore feet, and something he hadn't felt in years: pride. He slept that night behind the bakery again, but differently. Not as a failure. Not as a ghost. But as a man rebuilding brick by invisible brick. The next morning, he returned. Worked. Learned. Asked questions. The machines were loud, the pay was low, but he didn't care. He was earning his space in the world again. By the end of the week, the woman at the counter, her name was Rita, handed him an envelope with $40 and a bus token. "You work like someone who's been hungry," she said. Daniel smiled. "I have." That night, he did something strange. He bought a journal. Not from the trash, brand new. Clean pages. He wrote in it carefully, with a pen he borrowed from the library. "Today I earned something. Not just money. A place to stand." Then he flipped to the next page and drew a rough sketch, a digital mock-up of Ground Zero, the platform he'd dreamed of. It wasn't pretty. But it was real. His life was still fragile. Still on the edge. But now, he had ink on his hands and purpose in his blood. 2 weeks into the job, Daniel was early every day. 10 minutes before the shift, he'd sweep the floor, wipe down the counters, and check each machine even if no one asked him to. It wasn't just work, it was a ritual, a way to remind himself he still mattered. Rita started nodding at him more. Joe began calling him D instead of hey. It was slow, silent progress, but it meant the world. Evenings were spent at the library, hunched over a borrowed laptop. He was learning how to build a website. Not from tutorials, but trial and error. Free platforms. Community forums. Copying code, breaking it, fixing it. Each hour he spent coding Ground Zero was like laying bricks into a new identity. This wasn't about ego. It was about giving others what he never had, a place to land when the world forgets you exist. But just when it seemed the path was clearing, the storm came. One morning, Daniel arrived to find yellow tape across the print shop entrance. A fire. Overnight. Faulty wiring. No injuries, but the building was closed indefinitely. Joe paced the sidewalk, furious. Rita stood silent, eyes on the ground. Daniel's heart sank. Not because of the lost job, but because of how fragile hope suddenly felt. Joe tossed him a pack of gloves. "We're gonna clean what we can. Still need hands." They spent hours dragging out half-burnt boxes, charred paper, soaked machines. Ink stained everything. The smell was sharp and bitter. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Not from cold, from fear. What if it all disappeared again? What if every time he reached higher, life pushed harder? The next day, Rita handed him an envelope. "Half pay. It's all we can give. We're closing for a while." "Sorry." He took it. Nodded. Didn't beg. Just said, "Thank you." She paused. "You're not like most. You come back from the hits." Daniel wanted to believe that. But walking away that day felt like watching light fade. At the library, he stared at the login screen for an hour. Then finally, he wrote. Maybe it's not about building a perfect life. Maybe it's about learning to walk through the fires and still choose to begin again. He saved it as the first post for Ground Zero. 1 reader. No followers. But it was live. It existed. And so did he. The blog sat in a quiet corner of the internet. No ads, no followers, no attention. Just a black and white homepage, a title in plain font, Ground Zero, and one post, maybe it's not about building a perfect life. Daniel checked it every day, even though he knew no one had read it. But he wasn't waiting for fame. He was waiting for resonance, that click, that connection. In the meantime, he hustled. With the print shop closed, he took odd jobs, cleaning, hauling, painting numbers on curbs. Anything. His fingers cracked from cold water and chemicals. His shoes tore at the seams. But each night, he returned to the library and wrote. One entry per night. Raw, unfiltered. He didn't try to be poetic. He told the truth. Today I got yelled at for scrubbing a floor too slow. Today I ate from a dumpster. I wish that embarrassed me. It didn't. Today I remembered how my ex used to trace circles on my back when I couldn't sleep. I don't know why that hurt more than the hunger. And slowly, something strange happened. A comment appeared. Just one. A user named Ashes to Ashes wrote, I thought I was the only one. Thank you. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then replied, You're not alone. I see you. The next day, 2 comments. Then 4. The stories were painful. Honest. Some heartbreaking. A man sleeping in his car who read the blog at McDonald's Wi-Fi. A woman hiding bruises, finding strength in Daniel's words. A teenager who said, I'm still here. That's my victory today. Daniel wasn't a writer. He was a mirror. And people needed to see themselves. He added a share your story section. They came. He added an anonymous forum. It grew. By week 3, there were over 500 visits. He didn't tell anyone. Not Joe. Not Rita. Not even Victor, who he hadn't seen in weeks. This wasn't for praise. It was a lifeline, not just for others, but for himself. One night, while moderating comments, he found one that stopped him cold. You gave me a reason not to jump. Daniel stared at the screen, jaw clenched. Then slowly, he began to cry. Quietly. In the library. Surrounded by strangers, none of whom knew that at that moment, a man who once had nothing, had just saved a life. And maybe, just maybe, saved his own in return. Winter deepened. Nights grew sharper, winds crueler. Daniel's fingers stiffened as he typed, wrapped in gloves with holes at the tips. The library staff now greeted him with faint nods, not as a stranger, but as a regular, a fixture, someone quietly becoming something. Ground Zero kept growing. Each day brought new stories. New voices. Some anonymous. Some defiant. Some barely clinging to life. But all real. All human. Daniel became less a writer and more a caretaker. He stayed late to moderate, deleted hate, replied to pain. He couldn't fix anyone's life, but he could say, I hear you. And in that, people found something rare, acknowledgement. But with growth came pressure. The site crashed one night, too much traffic, not enough bandwidth. Daniel panicked. He had no budget. No tech support. Just a free server and borrowed laptop. He stared at the error message, helpless. Until an email appeared. Subject, I can help. The sender, Victor M. Brush. He blinked. Victor. He opened it. I found your blog. Saw the style in the logo. Knew it was you. I know code. I got you covered. You keep the heart alive, I'll keep the engine running. Daniel grinned. That night, he stood outside the bakery, looked up at the stars, and whispered, thank you, whoever's listening. With Victor's help, the site stabilized. A cleaner layout. Faster loading. Mobile access. The forum exploded. Posts from 15 countries. Art. Letters. Poetry. Screams. Laughter. One user wrote, "This isn't a website. It's a shelter." But Daniel still slept outside. Still folded into corners of the world, unseen by it. Then, one evening, Rita found him near the burned remains of the shop. "You still writing?" she asked. He nodded. She handed him an envelope. "There's a cafe opening 2 blocks over. They need someone to design their logo, menu, and signage. I told them about you." He opened the envelope. Inside, contact info. And a crisp $100 bill. He looked up, speechless. "Don't look so surprised," she said. "The world isn't always trying to break you." That night, Daniel bought a pair of warm boots. Then, for the first time in over a year, a room. Just for one night. 4 walls, a door that locked, and a bed with clean sheets. He lay there staring at the ceiling, unsure how to sleep without fear. He whispered, "Maybe this is what rising feels like, slow, uncertain, but real." He drifted off, still in his coat. Smiling. The cafe job became 3. The owner liked Daniel's work, simple, clean, honest. Word spread. A bakery needed new menus. A tattoo studio wanted rebranding. Small gigs, but real. Paid. Requested. His name began moving through the city like a quiet rumor. And Ground Zero kept beating. Now thousands visited weekly. Not millions. Not viral. But steady, loyal, alive. People didn't scroll past, they stayed. They read. They shared. Some donated. Enough for a proper hosting plan, a better laptop. Enough to breathe. One night, a journalist messaged him. "I want to tell your story. You built something from nothing. You gave strangers hope." Daniel replied. "I didn't build it. We all did. I just lit the first match." The article came out. Not glossy. Not sensational. Just real. It included his name. A photo. The sketch Victor had once drawn, "You're not lost. You're growing underground." It reached places Daniel never imagined. An email arrived from a foundation. They offered a grant to expand Ground Zero into something bigger: podcasts, workshops, outreach. He read the message 5 times, heart pounding. But before answering, he did something first. He walked to the old bakery. Still closed. Still covered in graffiti. He sat down on the cold sidewalk where he'd once slept. Pulled out his original notebook, pages torn, smudged, almost illegible. Flipped to the first line. "You are more than what you've survived." He read it slowly. Then looked up at the sky and whispered, "I made it. Not famous. Not rich. But whole." He'd wanted a second chance. But what he got was a new life. One built not on rescue, but on response. Not on being saved, but on choosing, again and again, to rise. He said yes to the grant. Ground Zero became a nonprofit. They opened a small studio. Then a small team. He hired people like him, fighters, rebuilders, the overlooked. He didn't stop sleeping lightly. Didn't stop scanning sidewalks for warmth. Some scars never fade. But they remind you. One night, as he walked home past a row of quiet windows, he passed a kid curled beneath a blanket on the steps of an abandoned bookstore. Daniel paused. Knelt. Removed his coat. Placed it over the kid. Said nothing. Left a card that read, you are more than what you've survived. Then walked on. Not because his story was over, but because someone else's was about to begin. What part of Daniel's journey resonated with you the most? Everyone faces moments where life feels like it's falling apart, but sometimes, that's exactly when we begin to rebuild. Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story matters too.